Lovely. Well, welcome to our webinar, the first in a series of webinars to help our three dioceses on our net zero carbon journeys over the next number of years. My name's Martin Carr. I'm Net Zero Officer in Guildford Diocese, and I'd like first of all to welcome and introduce some of my colleagues. Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Collins. I'm the Net Zero Program Manager across three dioceses of Guildford, Chichester, and Portsmouth. So good to see lots of familiar faces and some new ones as well.
Alison.
Hi there, I'm the Environment Officer at Guildford Diocese, so I work with Martin and with Steve.
That's great, Alison. Thank you. Gareth, are you online yet?
Yes,
I
he is, I
am,
think.
yes.
Mhm.
Can you, yeah. So I'm not sure how far you've got. I'm Gareth Martin, and I help Steve in Chichester Diocese on helping parishes look at ways to reduce their carbon emissions from their buildings in church and other buildings.
Thank you, Gareth. We've had apologies today from Matt Lockwood, who's Net Zero Officer for Portsmouth. He's on a half-term break, and from our DAC secretaries in Portsmouth and Guildford, David and Wendy. But hopefully they'll catch up with us in future webinars. Now, without further ado, let's get into the content. Just to give you an idea of where we're going today, we're going to start with a little introduction to what is in the audit reports from one of our audit companies, which is Greener Edge. Then I'll do a little bit of presentation on how we move from the audit report into creating a net zero plan. And we'll have a bit of input then from Steve about managing our net zero plans. We look at what permissions we need, what opportunities there are for funding. Alison's going to say something about how we learn and work together on the net zero journey. And then Matthew Sleep from Frimley Parish has kindly joined us to give a little bit of information of how they've used an audit to create a plan and start their actions towards net zero. So thank you, Matthew, for joining us. We'll hear from you later on. If at any point you've got any comments or questions, just drop those into the chat, and my colleagues will be keeping an eye on what's in there. Post any links which are helpful into the chat, and yes, and follow up kind of anything there. The webinar, as I say, is being recorded, so there'll be a recording available after the meeting. And when it comes to the question and answer time, which will be right at the end, we are definitely finishing by 2 o'clock. But at the end, we'll have time for questions and some responses. So pop those in the chat, or if you want to ask your questions verbally, just use the raised hand icon in Zoom. Because there's quite a lot of us here, if we can stay mute, that would be great when we're not speaking, just so that we don't have scaffolders and dogs and significant others interrupting our meeting. So I'm first of all going to introduce Lucy from Greener Edge, one of the audit companies we've been working with here in Guildford Diocese, to give us a little bit of information about how the audits are carried out and what information are in the reports that you've been receiving. Lucy, hi.
Brilliant. Hi, everyone. As Martin said, I'm Lucy Coombs. I work for a company called Greener Edge, and we're responsible for carrying out some of the energy audits. I'm not sure if I've visited any of you guys or any of our team have, but if I have, hi again. And today I thought I'd really quickly run through what's the outputs of an energy audit and what kind of information goes into building one of these reports. So I'm just going to share. All right, can everyone see my screen? Brilliant. So okay, so what's included in an energy report? So I think Martin's going to talk a bit later about why understanding your energy consumption and your net zero goals are so important. But what forms the basis of the report? Firstly, we're going to give you a carbon footprint And this is very similar to the footprints that you might get from your EFT reports, your energy footprint tools. But what's different about what we're providing is we're taking data from a longer period of time. For example, sometimes we might ask data from 2019 up to 2023. And so this footprint gives a wider, more long-term picture. So it might be different from the data that you're submitting every year to your energy footprint tools. So within the content of the energy audit, we are working towards a kind of template that Church of England have given with a ranking of interventions for solutions to help churches get to net zero. So these interventions are very wide ranging. They include things maybe like heat pumps or solar panels, but they also include interventions like heat the people technologies or infrared heaters, under pew heaters, that kind of thing. So our role as energy assessors is to kind of apply those solutions to a given building and say, right, what's going to work in these kind of circumstances. So within the interventions, we have your quick wins. So these might be things that you're very aware of, like upgrading to LED lighting and things that you might be doing already. But there might be some things in there which maybe an outside perspective, someone like us might notice, how could you optimize your heating strategy a little bit better to kind of save you that energy and save you that cost as well. And then that's forming the basis of your heating strategy. And then as part of your heating strategy, we're looking a little bit more long term. So we're thinking ahead, what's going to happen when your boilers break? What are you thinking about? Start thinking about now in order to reach net zero in the next 5, 10, whatever years. So what would we recommend based on your building use and your energy use for that kind of forward thinking now? As part of this, we might consider some building upgrades. So it might be things like if you have an office space, could that be insulated, or would we recommend secondary glazing in some of the windows, that kind of thing. As part of our energy audit report as well, we also include a solar model for all of our churches. So we're just doing a really preliminary model on the building to see, okay, would it be feasible to do solar panel or something like that in this case? So what information do we gather in order to write this report? So the site visit is very important because we have that set list of interventions. Our site visit is basically a feasibility study to see, all right, how do the interventions apply to your building? So the first things that we ask for is your energy consumption data. And as I said, this likely goes back a couple of years. So we kind of get a longer picture of how energy is being used in the building. We also look at your QI report and your EFT reports historically to look at, is there anything we need to take into account or any information on the construction materials, all that kind of good information that's in the QI reports is really helpful to us. On the day of the audit, we might run through some more building fabric questions. For example, to get an understanding, for example, maybe the roof has to be re-roofed in the near future. So that might lead us to think, okay, maybe there's an opportunity for insulation, or maybe the front rows of pews are always really cold because you have a large double glazed window and it's very drafty. So we're kind of getting understanding of how does building fabric, how is it all related to how energy is being used. And it's really important for us to get an understanding of heritage items as well. For example, if you have an organ or something like that, you might need a level of background heating, which is really important for the design of a heating strategy. We also ask about your building use and your energy use are very interconnected because we're thinking about the different heating requirements. For example, do you have is the building used by a large group of children, or do you have smaller groups of I can't think of a scenario. You have smaller acquired group or whatever. So different groups require different heating strategies. And so getting a picture of how the building is used and by whom allows us to form the basis of a heating design. And then again, we'll ask about your energy use and think, so in our minds, we're always thinking, right, is there any part of the building that could be used, could be heated independently, or perhaps a heating strategy that might work in one part of the church could be applied to another. So we're thinking with that long term in mind as well. So after the boilers break, what's next? So that's all that we hear from me. But I think Martin's going to talk about how the information that we gather in audit is going to help you get to net zero.
Thanks ever so much, Lucy. That's really helpful. And I hope you'll be staying around for any questions later in the webinar. Now, not every diocese, there are parishes here today from Chichester, Portsmouth, and Guildford, and other dioceses are working with other companies such as Inspired Efficiency and Mondes, but as Lucy says, there's a Church of England template. So even if the reports don't look exactly the same, they should all follow a pretty similar approach in terms of analysing and setting out recommendations. So what I'm going to do next is to share my screen and just talk a little bit about developing a net zero plan. So if you just bear with me, I shall get that onto the screen. Can everyone see that? Good. So from audit to action. So let's imagine you've had your audit done and you've received from Lucy or from someone else your audit report. And of course, it's not wanting to move forward now. Why is it doing that to me? There we are. So I think we've got it. So this, in some sense, before even the audit, we asked you to engage in 3 preliminary steps in your net zero journey. One, is to engage with the A Rocha Eco Church scheme and work towards your next award, whether that's bronze, silver, or gold. An eco church, of course, provides the wider context into which net zero falls. We've asked you to complete the energy footprint tool. So that we know how much energy, gas, and electricity, or indeed oil, you're using. And that information feeds into our strategy and also provides a metric against which we can measure whether our footprints are actually falling. And it's useful to know that the 2024 data input is now available. So you can go into the energy footprint tool at any time from now onwards and put in your energy use from the calendar year from January to December 2024. And we'd really encourage you to put it in as soon as possible so that we've got that data. And also in entering the data will help you in terms of being able to apply for grants or similar to help you move forward with net zero. And then there is the process of auditing. That might be via parish buying. The top 600 churches nationally have been chosen to receive a free energy audit through parish buying, and Greener Edge are one of the companies delivering that. But here in Guildford, we have a diocesan scheme to target other high-emitting parishes, which has been delivered by Inspired Efficiency. Some parishes I know have commissioned their own energy audit, and it's really good to see that that's been happening. If you are lucky enough to have received a parish buying audit, you're also entitled to a £3,000 grant from the National Church. So just a little flag there that if you haven't applied for that grant yet, please apply for it. It's not a competitive grant, it's available for you. You just need to say what you're using it towards, how it relates to information in the audit report, and there it will be to help you insulate or put new lighting in or optimize your heating or whatever. So those are the preliminary steps before we get to the planning. But how might we make a net zero plan? Well, first of all, we need to know the steps that we need to take. And as Lucy says, some of those might be in the audit report. But for some of us, perhaps we're in a very small church, we haven't been able to commission an audit yet, or it seems that the steps are small in number and easy to identify. So some of you perhaps have followed the practical pathway to net zero, which is on the Church of England's website, which helps you to, in some sense, do a bit of a self-audit of what needs doing in our church to get towards net zero. So whether it's an audit or you've used the practical pathway, you've identified the steps that you're going to take to get to net zero. So on the next slide, and I don't expect that you're going to be able to read all of this information, but this is a typical summary table of the actions to take towards net zero. Perhaps it's been taken from your church and you recognize it, but this came from one of our audit reports. And it contains the action, it contains the estimated energy savings, so you can see which ones are going to save the most energy and which ones are perhaps a little more marginal. The cost savings, because of course, as we move towards net zero, we also hope that energy bills will be falling. But there's also the capital cost. How much will it cost upfront to put this measure into our church building? And then from those two pieces of data, we can calculate the payback time. So we say, well, it'll cost you this now, but because of savings on bills, it'll have paid for itself within 3 years or 7 years or 70 years. The permissions that you might need, it's contained in some audit report recommendations, and we'll come on to permissions later. But obviously, some things like changing a light bulb, you don't need any permission for. But for installing solar panels on your roof, or indeed a heat pump in your building, would certainly require permission. And then the carbon savings, which are estimated from that action. So those are just raw actions that need to be taken. But if we're going to move from having a list of actions into having a plan, we need to think about which actions will take priority in our plan. And that will depend very much on context. Now, Lucy said that in the plan there are rankings, and in some sense, some of the things are quite easy to do. They can be done yourself, or perhaps are at very low cost. And so you might want to do those first. But for others of us, perhaps our boiler is right at the end of its life. And in fact, heating is going to be the thing that's going to be our first priority, even if it is quite a big project. So depending on your context, the age of your boiler, the needs of your building, do you have a very ancient lighting system, or is it now mainly LED and just needs a few additions? Do you have a drafty and cold building, or is it reasonably well insulated? So depending on your context, decide which are the priorities. Then we need to think about permissions. As I say, things that we'll come more to permissions later, but things like solar panels or heat pumps or new, certainly lighting systems which would require new fittings, will require permission. So we'll need to think about what permissions we need. Also, and Steve is going to say more about managing our plan, but who's going to be responsible? It's all well and good to say, well, we'd like to have solar panels on the roof. But if we just put it in the report and then don't make a responsible person, then we don't really know who's going to do that. So who's going to be a responsible person? Is it one person? Is it a team? How will they relate to the leadership of the parish? And then when will it happen? The Church of England has committed to be net zero by 2030. Today, we're sitting here in 2025. Are these actions that will happen this year, or next year, or perhaps actually in 3 or 4 years' time when we've done a whole lot of other actions first? What's realistic for your parish? And that will depend again on your context. So this is just a little very simple plan that I've put together sort of for an imaginary church called St. Ingrid's Church. And I've put them in the order of priority in which they might be carried out. So imagine that St. Ingrid's needs to insulate its roof at a cost of 3K. £200 will be saved from energy saved. That's going to be a List A permission, which means that it can be done without any formal permission from the Archdeacon or the DAC. And the responsibility for that is with wardens, and that's going to be done this year. And so all the other actions there have been just included, excluding drafts, changing the lights, putting solar panels onto the church, and then replacing the gas boilers with heat pumps. That's for St. Ingrid's, that's quite simple. It's just five actions, but those actions have all been ranked. They've got a time scale, they've got a responsible person, and they know what the cost and permissions are that are needed are going to be. So what other considerations might be needed in putting together our plan? Well, one is that we're moving away from gas and towards powering our buildings electrically. But if we're powering our buildings electrically, we obviously want to be sourcing only renewable electricity for our building. So the Church of England is doing some work or has done some work on what is a really green or renewable tariff. And we will be asking parishes to switch across to using a renewable tariff. They're not necessarily more expensive than regular tariffs. And in fact, our next webinar, which is going to be in March, Sophie Phillips from National Church will be joining us to talk about renewable tariffs. But that needs to be part of your plan. The plan should be approved by the PCC, and I think Steve is going to say a bit more about that. If you do draw up a plan and have it ready to go, it would be lovely to see it, whether that's myself at Guildford or the Portsmouth or Chichester teams, just so we can see what sort of plans are being produced, how they look, and share best practice. And when you're putting together your plan, don't think, well, we can't possibly ever do that because it's far too expensive. Actually, start by thinking about what the actions are. We can think about funding later. Perhaps there's a grant, or perhaps funding becomes available from National Church to carry out certain actions. So the plan should really contain the things which need to be done. And then finally, if we're aiming for 2030, we should start now and depending on urgency. So perhaps there are things need doing this year. Our boiler's about to fail. We need to think about our heating. Our electricity costs are huge. So it would be great to get those solar panels up there straight away. Our lighting is all halogen and fluorescent. Changing to LED would be a really quick win. So whatever you're thinking, don't leave all the actions to 2029. Start now and then work. Then it'll feel manageable. It's that thing about one bite at a time until we've got all the way there. Put dates against items. Larger items will take time to plan. That's the other thing. Some things can't just be done immediately. You'll need to perhaps get a feasibility study. You'll need to wait for permissions from the local authority or from the DAC. So there might be things you can do even if you're not ready to put in those solar panels or that heat pump quite yet, that we can do to get ready for when the funding is available. Do we have a worked up feasibility study? Do we have the permissions we need? Great, we've got the grant. We can now instruct the contractor to go ahead. And be aware, as I say, of which items will be best in reducing your emissions. For most churches, heating is the largest part of your emissions. So that needs to be, whether it's immediate or whether it's perhaps 3 or 4 years down the line, needs to be in your plan to be thinking about. Yeah, that's worth saying, I think. Now, I think that's probably enough from me. I'm going to hand over to my colleague and project manager, Steve, for some thinking around governance and plan management.
Great, thank you, Martin. I'm just aware from my own experience. Sorry, can I just check you can hear me? Yes, you can. Good. That quite often at parish and local church level, we often do our planning in quite an organic way. And my work background is from sort of planning and running community projects all around the world with tier funds. So my background work-wise is a lot more sort of structured. And what I'm going to try and do now is just bring some of the sort of top tips in a sense that I've learned really through that more structured approach, which I think can be applicable in that more sort of informal parish setting that we often find ourselves in. And I think in terms of approvals and governance, quite often governance might appear rather dry and boring, but I find that these processes and doing governance and getting the proper approvals in place can actually be a friend and enable us to progress things that we want to do and actually get the things that we want to do onto the agenda of PCCs and the people who are really sort of in charge of the overall leadership. So, you know, we can get different types of approval. There's the approval in principle from a PCC. Yeah, we want to do this, but we want some more details. And so come back to us and we will clarify that. And it's always good to sort of ask a PCC, what do they want to be kept informed on? What further details do they need to get their approval? And try and sort of feed them, you know, with suggestions that you know will work for them, but will actually also work for you. And of course, keep clear minutes and if possible, get a sight of those if you're not on the PCC so that you're sure you've got those approvals in place. And actually having the net zero as a standing item on each PCC agenda can really sort of mean that you're there at the forefront of thinking in amongst all the other things that are going on in church life. And I find, you know, as a program manager, when I'm involved in preparing for my equivalent of a PCC meeting, it's really helpful to just let me check things and make sure that I am actually doing everything I should be doing, because quite often you could sort of just drift off. So governance and approvals can be your friend. Next slide, please, Martin. This is what I find, this question of what does success look like is a really, really powerful question, and helps people really think to, you know, at the end of the day, what are we wanting to be different as a result of what we're doing? And I would really encourage you not just to think about that question yourself, but asking lots of people in your church, if we're going to do this, what do we want to be different? And you'll get different answers from different people. But if we're going to bring everybody along, or particularly the people we need along with our plans, it's really good to find out what they think is needed, so that we can bear that in mind and make everybody feel that actually we're heading in the right direction. And when we've got there, that we know we've got to where we want to. And I think actually remembering as we're going through the implementation of our plans what success looks like is a great thing to keep referring back to and keep us focused as we're going through all the finer details of what we're involved in. So next slide, Martin, keeping people informed. And I think quite often, you know, the more technical planners amongst us often forget about communication. Communication is key. So I would really, when you're planning, it's worth investing on time. Worth investing time on assessing who's going to be affected by our plan, keeping them informed and involved, so that we're less likely to encounter problems that we might never have thought about if we hadn't thought about those that we're interacting with. So, you know, our communication plans, again, can be a real enabler to make sure we're not missing things. We want our plans in terms of net zero to be an enabler of our church's wider work, its mission work, not a blockage or just something off on a tangent. So communication, which includes, of course, listening, is really, really important for that. So invest time in this and actually plan communications accordingly. Thanks, Martin. Next slide. Now, whether you have an official project manager or just somebody who's fulfilling these functions, it's really important, I think, to actually have somebody who's overall in charge and overseeing the plans that we're putting in place. It should be somebody that the PCC is happy with having in place. And I think probably the biggest role of a project manager is to have that overall view, the big picture of things, and actually understanding how things interrelate with each other. So it's the people aspects, it's the technical aspects, the financial quality, timing, and is just able to stand back, look at those and make sure that everything is holding together in a coherent plan. Next slide, Martin. And I think an important part of this is just what are the interdependencies in the different parts of our plan. Which activities are dependent on others being completed first? Can we combine some activities to result in savings? So, example, if we're replacing the lights and we need scaffolding in, could we be doing something in terms of the roof insulation at the same time, making use of that scaffolding? And what are its effects on wider routine church activities? Who needs to be consulted and keeping them informed, as I've already alluded to? Next slide, Martin. So some of you might be aware there's some great little tools out there. You know, I like the Gantt chart. There's plenty of templates for things like this. If you just Google them, if you're not familiar with them, and it just gives you that visual view of what's happening concurrently or consecutively. How do they relate to each other? And for those of us who sort of think in different ways, it's really helpful to have that visual representation of all the different things that we're planning. And of course, it will help you as you're communicating to others and to your PCC. There's lots of templates out there on Excel, on Canva, and other tools. Next one, please, Martin. Other key tasks for the project manager, of course, is monitoring. And I always find there's three things if you look at project management. What are we doing? How are we doing on timing? How are we doing on finance? And how are we doing in terms of scope? Are we covering all the aspects of the work as planned? And of course, for us, it's really important to be monitoring how people are being affected by what we're doing. What are they saying? What are they thinking? And then real sort of purpose of monitoring is to be coming back and saying, from what we're seeing, from what we're hearing, do we need to make adjustments and revisions to our activities, our budgets, on our communications? And again, hold in the front of your mind, what does success look like? Are we on track to meet those expectations that have been articulated by key people? Next slide, Martin. And the other key tasks, this one is often forgotten. We often don't make time at the end of a project to evaluate and reflect and learn. What did we do well? What would we do differently if there's a next time? And how are we actually going to remember the key learning that we've identified? Can we share it with others in our deanery, also with the Net Zero team as well, so that we don't forget it and it doesn't just sit with us, but others can benefit from our reflections and learning. Finally, from me, just one key thing as well is don't forget to celebrate. Celebrate obviously our achievements, our successes, but also the learning that's coming out of some of the more challenging experiences that we've had. And part of that celebration really includes thanking all the different people who've been involved in our plans. I'll hand back to you, Martin.
Thank you, Steve. That was really helpful. And I think that really kind of emphasizes that the plan is a sort of living and dynamic document, which we can keep coming back to, monitoring and adapting as we move forward. So in the next section, I'm just going to say very little indeed about, just get that, about permissions. I don't have a DAC secretary with us in the meeting today, but the DAC secretaries are key people in helping us make sure that we have the correct permissions in place for our projects. Now, the first link that I have included in the slides, and you will be getting the slides after the webinar, is a link to the faculty jurisdiction rules, which are up to date, and that includes List A matters, which can be done without any special permission, and generally those are things which don't change the look of the church or repairs. So changing light bulbs would be a classic one. List B, which require consultation with the diocesan advisory committee and a letter of permission from the archdeacon. So perhaps changing some of the light fittings in your church might come into that category, or things which will require a full faculty, which will require consideration at the DAC meeting and then paperwork to be drawn up and a faculty to be issued by the Chancellor. Now, a very important change in recent years to faculty jurisdiction is that if you have a gas boiler and it fails, you cannot any longer replace a gas boiler with a new gas boiler under List B. A full faculty would need to be sought for a new gas boiler, and that would need to be done with due consideration for the net zero guidance. When I say that, if there are other options to gas, then those are to be preferred to putting in a new gas boiler. And in fact, in most cases, there are other options available, net zero options. So that change is a good one to help us progress more quickly towards net zero. So you might be able to identify from the list of rules where your action falls, but you might think, actually, I've got questions, or I'm not entirely sure. The DAC secretaries are friendly and helpful people, and so go to them and say, look, we're thinking about doing this. What are the DAC requirements? And they'll be able to guide you through that process. If you are a historic building, there is plenty guidance from Historic England, who may wish to comment. If you're doing something which changes the appearance or function of your church significantly, perhaps you're putting solar on the roof, or you're installing heat pumps. So they might have particular comments on how that should be done with sensitivity to the fabric of the church. And if anything is happening which is external to the church, again, the sort of the heat pump which sit outside the building or solar panels which sit on top would need local authority planning permission. So it's always worth starting the planning work early. It will, in my experience as a parish manager when I was in Marylebone, it takes longer than you think to get the permissions to come through. So that can be part of your plan to get those things in place early so that you can get the work done when you want to get it done, rather than actually thinking, well, there's a delay while we receive the faculty or while we receive the planning permission. My next slide is about funding. And that's always a question, I think, which is quite pressing. Well, we'd love to be net zero, we'd love to go green, but we don't have the money for it. Well, there is support. If I've mentioned already the £3,000 grants with the parish buying audits. So again, I really encourage you to draw down that grant when you're able to towards the project identified in your plan. Each diocese has a quick wins fund. It's not a lot of money. It's only, I think, about £48,000, but that can be distributed in small chunks to parishes, again, towards things which can be done quickly and without huge expense. So projects which would be suitable might include heating one part of the church with radiant heating, changes to your lighting, perhaps insulation or draft exclusion. So lots of little things which you could do quite quickly, and the Quick Wins Fund might be able to help you. If you're interested in applying, get in touch with me in Guildford, or Gareth in Chichester, or Matt in Portsmouth Diocese. There may be suitable funding sources locally. Certainly in Surrey, we have the Your Fund Surrey, which is a fund that the councillors help advise for grants towards, and that has helped a number of our parishes in Surrey. There are charities and grant giving bodies that might be local to you. And again, get in touch with the relevant diocese for advice on those. There are national charities such as National Churches Trust, Garfield Weston Foundation, the Benefact Trust, and it's worth putting aside a little bit of time just to investigate what grants are available, how much money are they for, and it's really important. What are the criteria? Because there's no point putting in a lot of time to apply for the grant, only to be told, oh, well, you're not actually eligible for this grant because your building is not used mainly for community use, or you're not a listed building, or whatever. So be very careful to look at the criteria for any grant you're applying for to make sure that your building and your project meets those criteria, then you've got the best chance. And actually, a source of funding could be the PCC itself, because we're investing to save. A well-insulated building won't take so much to heat, so we'll start making savings immediately. If we change to LED lighting, we might reduce our electricity use by over 50%. So again, immediate savings. Solar panels are producing electricity to use in our building, so immediate savings. So if your PCC has some reserves, think about investing those for the future. We're producing buildings which are warmer, which are more welcoming, more comfortable, better for our mission. So any investment we can make, as well as reaching net zero, will help our mission and our churches for the future. Now, I've been talking for a long time, but I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Alison, who's going to say something about learning and working together on the net zero journey. Hello, Alison.
Thanks very much, Martin. I'm just going to share as well. Let's hoping this works. Is that something you can see? Is there anything on the screen?
Can't see yet, I'm looking. There we are.
Is that working? Fantastic. Great. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to talk a tiny bit about the idea of working together. Sometimes this doesn't happen a great deal in the Church of England. We're very much our own little parishes. But it's something that is beginning to happen with net zero because we are all doing this at exactly the same time. Often with refurbishment projects, a new roof, whatever it is, people are doing it, a decade apart. But for net zero, we've all got this deadline, and that means that we can actually work together. How do I get this to move? There we go. Yeah, there is something I think, so the message here is please don't feel daunted by all of this. And you are definitely in a great position if you have colleagues who are doing this at the same time as you. It's just a really good idea to try and get connected with other parishes in your deanery or in your diocese. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the three dioceses. So, for example, in Guildford, we've got 4 main ways that you can really be connected with other parishes. We have something called the Eco Network, which is a kind of online digital platform where any parish can go in and ask a question, and then another parish could answer it. So you're not just waiting for a couple of people at the diocese. You can actually start learning from one another, which is just such a useful thing. And then people can put their own tips in, the things that they've learned, so every parish can learn from that. Or you can just celebrate your success with other people as well. It's not taken off quite as much as we hoped. We'd love people to populate that more with questions, with tips, with their own advice. But it's a really great thing to be connected in with other people. We've also got a newsletter which goes out every 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that, which is really useful. We have a webinar, and this is really lovely because you can see people, you can ask questions, and it's just a drop in for, you can come and ask questions, or you can just hear another parish talking about what they've been doing, which is really great. And then we have our Dyson website as well with a lot of information on there. So there's all sorts of things to help you. But and yeah, just to let you know that that's Guildford. Over in Portsmouth, there's the Net Zero team there, and they have David and Matt, who are their Net Zero team. And in Chichester, there is Gareth Martin, who has a community of practice. So that's a kind of you sign up, and I'll give you all of these links in a minute. You sign up and you put your name down, and you become part of this community. So there are all these ways that people are already working together.
Alison, just to clarify, so in Chichester, we've actually got 2 sort of what are in effect community of practices. There's the Parish Environmental Support Network, which our DEO Buff runs, and that's sort of having the discussions more around sort of eco-church and biodiversity and sustainability, the more sort of technical side of things, but also sort of fundraising is what comes under the community of practice that Gareth's supporting us with.
Brilliant. But sometimes I go around to deanery synods and I talk to a deanery at a time. And this is the question that I always ask. Is there a way that you could collaborate in your deanery? What would it look like? And we get people to sit together in groups and just discuss this, because this is really the way to take all of that weight off the shoulders of those poor people in your PCC that would otherwise be doing this in isolation. If they can do this together, you have really done an amazing job. I have actually 2 jobs. My first job is to be the environment officer in Guildford Diocese. My other job is to be the net zero officer in Westminster Deanery in London. And then we've got 21 churches who are all working together. We've done things like apply to the local county council, so city council, and we got £100,000 for our preliminary net zero actions amongst the churches after we'd had some funding for our audits. So there's all sorts of, there's a real kind of like a buying power or a heft that you can have by being a group of churches together. So there might be things that you could ask for from the net zero officers in your deanery. You could say, could you come and we'll get a PCC training morning together where we get all the different PCCs together, and you can just teach us how to do net zero. You could try and get a fundraising workshop where we can even ask the national team if there were enough churches to come and do that kind of thing for us. You could have you could all pull together and employ a net zero officer just for your deanery. That would be a really useful way of taking the burden And that's the job that I do in London. Or you could actually just employ a fundraiser between a group of churches. And the minute you start thinking in that way, it all becomes very doable. That kind of like, that sense of overwhelm that some of these slides might be giving you. Actually, if you have a deanery fundraiser, you just put in £1,000 and actually somebody is raising money for your net zero actions. Suddenly this becomes very doable. And I would really recommend that you start that conversation at your next synod and just say, is this something that we could do? In Guildford Diocese, we're looking for an eco link. So in the same way that the PCC has a secretary and the diocese can automatically talk to every parish because they can email the secretary, and the same for finance with the treasurer, we would really love to have an eco person who is just the nominated link so that we can email out and let everybody know what's going on. So there is a form, and I'm going to put all of the contact details in chat in a second. But if you could find somebody, they don't have to do all the work, they just have to be the link. And they would be somebody who would then talk to PCC and say, this is what the diocese has said. There's a new fundraising opportunity, like just so that all of that information is getting passed on. So just some of the people that you can talk to. This is myself here with my email address, and Martin. All these slides will go out. Please put your name and your email address in the chat and your parish so we can send you out the slides. Over in Portsmouth, there's David Kane and Matt Lockwood. They are the Net Zero team there, and those are the email addresses. Again, they'll be in chat and they'll be on the slides. And this is Steve, who is who oversees obviously the 3 dioceses, and he works with Martin, who has the Net Zero community of practice, that group down in Chichester. So that's the end of my bit there.
Thank you very much, Alison. Time is pushing on, but we're going to now welcome a very good friend of the Net Zero team, Matthew Sleep from Frimley Parish, who's going to give a little case study on the actions they've taken in response to an audit they had done a number of years ago. Matthew, over to you.
Thank you. Here we go. I'm not sure how you sort that. What goes on here? Oh, we share that. That's it. Can anybody not see that? So this is Frimley Parish Energy Project, which started last year. In fact, quite a long time ago now. But we're celebrating the 200th anniversary of Frimley Parish this year. This is St. Peter's Church, which is 200 years old. But it also consists of a community centre about 100 yards removed from the church, and also St. Francis Church, which is 60 years old, and that's in the more rural part of the parish, which also has Forest Church operating from it. And we're embarking on a net zero strategy in our first phase. And as Lucy was saying earlier on, it's so important to have a context for all this. And I think we looked at having some sort of strategy for what we're doing to cover the large parish boundary, inclusive of the 2 churches, and also the community centre, which is really the hub of our community operations, of course. And we started off by data collection and then morphed that into the energy strategy, which you were talking about earlier on, the energy audit that you were talking about earlier on. But the key things were that we wanted to understand what the steady state of the energy consumption was, and where the key points were to change and put that into the first phase and see how we got on. Also, the other consideration is being able to future-proof what we do so that all our buildings have a share in the strategy, and we put the effort where we've got the longest potential, if you like, in use of the buildings. But also we have to look at how the energy prices are likely to fare in the future, and we're pretty certain that the energy prices are likely to rise. So that is that is the sort of background strategy that we started with. So this is a pictorial form of our strategy, our first stage, and that's focused on the community centre with 22 solar panels, which generates a huge amount of solar energy with a whacking great battery, which will be able to provide at least a day's worth of electricity to the halls. The whole thing will be networked through the service provider, who in this case is Octopus Energy, who are apparently green, and be able to adjust our usage and also to be able to sell energy into the grid when we have an excess, and use an appropriate tariff to be able to do that. So that's all, if you like, the plan for what we're about to do. And the first thing we have to do, though, is to modify our electrical services to be three-phase, because unless you have three-phase, you can't make efficient use of your energy services. So this is our pilot, and we've just got planning permission to go ahead with it, and we're likely to have it installed in April. So we'll get a year's data from it before we decide on the next steps. But we envisage what the next steps will be, which will be to extend the solar panels, replace our gas boilers, as you were saying earlier on. Any replacement needs to be electric heat pumps, to be able to then extend both to both the other buildings, to St. Peter's Church, which has the finest set of pre-Raphaelite windows designed by Burne-Jones in the south of England, which actually vents heating about as fast as we can generate it at the moment. So we need to be able to look at the most effective way of heating that, and also providing electricity to it. And then St. Francis Church, which is likely to be also the target for air source heat pumps. So we've got a sort of staged approach here, which all project managers like to have. But we know that we need to be able to be very alert to change in the technology, because that is moving on very fast. And one example is that the solar panels at the moment can generate 40 kilowatts of energy. It's not long ago that there were only 30. So, there are step changes going on in the capability of things. We know also that ground source heat pumps can be able to generate huge amounts of energy as well, and that requires a large amount of land, and they're very expensive at the moment. But we know that the price of those will come down, and the approaches to doing that will improve over time. But the other aspect to it, which also Lucy mentioned, is being able to communicate this to the congregation and get their buy-in to it, because not only do we need to be able to raise funds from outside the church, but also get them involved. But everything that we do is driven by the data. And I've put an example of the data that we started collecting around 2017, because subsequent to that, the energy consumption and the way in which we consume it has gone up and down, as you can imagine, through the COVID crisis. And also since then, the kind of the pattern of usage we've had has been affected by improvements that we've been able to make to, for example, putting LED lighting into the church on a wholesale basis. So the steady state that we got from back in 2017, 18 and 19 is the benchmark that we've used for how we calculate how many solar panels we need, how big a battery we need, and all that sort of thing. The key thing here is to have that data in terms of kilowatt hours and not in terms of price, because price has rocketed around, as we all know, over the last 5 years, and is likely to continue to do so. So all those things need to be taken into consideration when we're doing the long-term plan, as it were. And finally, I think that at the core of all this, of course, is how we introduce the cultural change behind the energy aspect, because it definitely is a cultural change. Nobody in the congregation in 1825, when Jane Austen's brother gave the first sermon at St. Peter's, was enjoying central heating, which we all have now. And we know that we need to be austere with our use of energy and how we control it, and we need to get that sort of attitude of mind into both our users, congregation, and our users of the community centre. The second point I want to make is that in this embarking on this project, it's quite clear that we need to engage very closely with our contractors, and we went to a great deal of trouble to identify contractors who were sympathetic with the mission of the church, of course, also sympathetic and understanding of the planning process. And this has been, until now, the biggest single factor in our project, because the planning offices seem to try to confound everything that we've put forward to plan for our church net zero future. It is quite extraordinary, and it's an experience which I know a lot of other people have been through, not just churches, but also people in everyday life. They get around it by ignoring it, actually, for the most part. But we, of course, where we have to use public money, have to follow the process absolutely meticulously. And it has been quite extraordinary how difficult it has been to get planning permission to do this. When we first started, we requested to do it under permitted development so that we could get a certificate of lawful development. Well, that was turned down because apparently our church halls were in the curtilage of the church, even though they're 1985 buildings and removed from the church, and they wouldn't take any kind of support from the diocese with that point of view, so to go into full planning, which is a major undertaking, which I'm sure you will appreciate. And even when all the consultation had been done, they came back with questions about glare and glint of solar panels, and I had to go and get evidence from Farnborough Museum, who put up solar panels in the path of the aircraft landing there, that solar panels don't exhibit glare and glint, and they had 18 months to bring these issues to the front. So it was an extraordinarily difficult thing to do, but I would advise anybody that sets about it to get the contractors involved and also any local experts. I think I've almost got a guild of energy professionals on the board of Frimley Parish to help with our project. And the final point I'd like to make of the cultural change is understand your service provider opportunities. We use Octopus Energy. I'm not an expert on other service providers, but we chose Octopus at the beginning of the energy crisis because they were renewable, totally renewable, as I understand it. But also they throw out a raft of different services which you can use to help with your energy management. Not least of which is an effective software package which helps you balance the yield from any renewable projects that you have, but also enables you to tap into other different sources. And also they provide, for example, charges for car parks so that you can make use of that kind of thing to generate money. So it's understanding your service provider and also being wary of the different tariffs that you can use to get the best out of your service provider. So I hope that's a brief overview of what we are embarking on, I hasten to add. And over the next year, we'll be collecting data through our software to understand how we can balance the energy that we get from the solar panels with the energy provided by the service provider, and then use that to understand how we then take the next step, which is extending our solar panels on the church halls and replacing our gas boilers with air source heat pumps. And it'll be a very interesting and exciting year to do. And I take your point too earlier, Lucy, I think it was, or Steve, I can't remember, that you need to thank people on the way, because there's a lot of expertise locked up out there in the various experts that we've used. As I said, we've almost got a guild of energy helpers on the panel. So absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That's really, really helpful. And thank you to Frimley for all the learning that you've done almost on our behalf, particularly around these difficult planning issues. Now, we are just over 2 o'clock. So if anyone is not able to stay any longer, please just leave the meeting. That's no problem at all. But for those who'd like to stay on just a few minutes longer, and I suggest perhaps until 10 past, and then we'll definitely wind up. But just for questions, comments, any more learning that we want to do. So we've got a panel really. We can ask questions to Matthew or to Lucy or to Alison, Steve, and myself. There are some questions in the chat, and I wonder whether we might start just by addressing the issue which has come up in the chat about boilers which might suddenly fail, and how are we going to replace those? Steve, I wonder if you had a comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really difficult one. And I think the thing is, as much as possible, to be planning ahead and letting your net zero team and your DAC team, we will work together at a diocesan level, know as soon as possible if you feel that your boiler is approaching near end of life. If it has actually failed, there is a limited fund available from the national office, and we've been able to secure one of those grants, I think, in each of the three dioceses now, but that is just for boilers that have actually failed. There is quite a low take up of that nationally, so we're going to try and get some additional grant applications in our three dioceses. But I think it's a difficult one. I think the way that other parishes have dealt with it is, just seeing the way that they're sort of thinking, well, if it's going to cost us £80,000, well, actually to replace like for like will cost us £30,000 anyway, maybe. And so they've actually been budgeting for that and building it in. So the extra you're looking at is suddenly looking a bit smaller, maybe a bit more manageable. But let us know, and we will try and work with you as much as we can. But it's a case of us linking you with other funding sources. And particularly if you're using your buildings for community frontline services like food banks, etc., that might make it easier to get some of those grants. It's a challenge. It's difficult, but let's just keep us informed and let's work together. I saw that Nick Hans Clark had a question
Nick's
as well.
got a question for Matthew. Nick, do you want to just highlight that, and then Matthew can respond?
Yeah. Where is the question?
Just in the chat. So Nick asks, are all of your in-scope buildings well used? If not, has this been a factor in the solution? Also, did you need to justify more than 100 amps per phase for your 3-phase?
Right. So the 3-phase is only applicable to the community centre, and we haven't had to justify upgrading that, since we are doing a solar energy project, and it seems to be part of the package of being able to upgrade to a certain level to be able to support solar energy yield. So that's that part. Well, the usage of the 3 churches is interesting because, of course, the community centre is the one that really generates the greatest amount of usage and uses the greatest amount of energy. So making a dent in that will make a big difference, I think, to our bills over the course. The main church, St. Peter's, is the main point of usage. But St. Francis also has community activities going on there as well. And that's a difficult one because that's independent of the other two, removed by about a mile and a half. So we need to be able to think out how we're going to have a mini project, if you like, around St. Francis to justify the rather smaller congregation that we get there.
Thank you, Matthew. There was a question about are loans available, and Alison has put something in the chat about low interest loans from Surrey County Council. I don't know if you're in other local authority areas whether similar schemes exist there. Are there any other questions that people have that they'd like to give verbally? If you want to just pop your hand up.
Sorry, just about the loans as well. Again, I don't have a massive amount of information on this, but down in Chichester, they do Archdeacon's loans. I don't know how big the fund is, but they are apparently up to £50,000 interest free. And I see no reason why we shouldn't push for some of those to be given for net zero works. Also, so you're aware, there is an energy efficiency scheme that we just became aware of last week, which is run by, it's been administered by an organisation called Groundworks, which is offering a package of 40% grants, 60% loans to community organisations. You have to take the whole package. You can't just take the grant. It looks like quite a tough scheme to get into, similar to the VCSE scheme that we were aware last year. But if you're interested in that, let us know. And I do have actually already had contact with the schemes administrator last week through Surrey County Council. And so, you know, it's something that you would have to apply for, but we might be able to sort of help you through that process. So let us know.
Thank you, Steve. I think we are going to have to wrap up there, but if your question hasn't been answered, please just drop us an email and we will attempt to do so. I dropped the a Word document into the chat for our webinar series. We've got a webinar coming up in March about green tariffs. So I hope you'll join that one, and that's with Sophie from the national team. Do sign up for communities of practice, newsletters. In Guildford, we run monthly drop-ins. It would be good to hear more from you, what you're doing, and to continue this learning journey together. But thank you all for attending today. The recording of the webinar will be available as soon as I press stop, and then download it onto the computer and get it up onto our website, which might take hopefully not more than a few days to do. But thank you again for coming, and we hope we'll see you again at a webinar soon. Thanks very much.